The family is really well, really well. I don't know if we talked about it at all, but our theory, our parenting theory with Eloise, has in fact been that 2-year-olds don't really need to have playmates. Like, don't playing with other 2-year-olds is not really a developmentally useful thing. In fact, it's developmentally not useful because other 2-year-olds tend to be give bad lessons of fighting in mind and stuff like that. And so for the past 2 years, in particular for the past year and a half, we've been doing the thing we would have been doing anyway, which is staying very close, having a very small number of very committed adults who are focusing on relationship and parenting as as a fundamental piece of human relationality. Spending a lot of time at my parents' place. I got an RV and drove out there, and yeah, it's actually been almost like been supporting us in what we otherwise would have been attempting to commit to do. The only real wrinkle has been because of my family situation. I haven't actually been able to see my older girls very much. In fact, there's a big period of almost like 6 months where I didn't see them at all, which was very unfortunate. And also witnessing their response to particularly just to lockdown and shutdown and closure and the movement into the virtual. It's been a different story, but I was just thinking about the little one. And of course she has, she wants to form tribal relationships, but her bonding relationships get torn because the people that she's connecting with, we don't live in the same plot of land. And that's been probably the roughest part of the past year for us. But I think broadly speaking, everybody's, I would say, in the direction of thriving, not thriving, but doing pretty well.
That's good.
Yeah.
How old are your older ones?
18 and 16.
Yeah.
And all girls.
Yeah. So 18 and 16. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing in our 18, 16-year-old kids is their understanding of their future is reshaping.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they've had me around, these are my stepkids.
Okay.
But they've had me around for the last 9 years or something. So I've been here, and I'm always like, okay, you guys. So there's things we need to do, and there's things that are not worth doing, and we've had a lot of talks along the way. But still, there was a big bump this year when they didn't have a graduation. They didn't go to university right after. They can't get a job because because
Yeah.
COVID. And just the recognition that this world that they have been perceiving in its rhythm and ongoingness was actually stoppable, was actually, that the Titanic could actually be interrupted in its path. And so I think that the deep down shifting is there. I think that's the one that's really and I don't think you and I can imagine what it would be like to be 16 or 18 years old and be looking at the future from where they are.
Yeah, I definitely have noticed exactly that, like a sort of a very deep empathy that has intense but only very subtle senses. Like no, wow, okay, I get that, because it's not gettable. At least not for me. I can imagine there would be some people who had lives that have had something similar, but then again, this is very singular. Like, you really can't really compare this to like a war or a natural disaster that is very acute. This is something that has changed everything in the whole world, but in ways that are mysterious in many ways. Like we were talking about earlier, this is like strictly nonlinear, but with enough strength to create a weirdly confusing awareness of the Titanic. Like, you can see the water, you're a fish and now you're aware of the water, but it's not, oh, there's the water. It's more like, wait, it almost feels aesthetic more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And exactly. Something so strange. And they, this is not like 1916, where there was another pandemic. We're living in an era where there is like an overall marination in the idea that technology can fix it.
That's for sure.
And technology didn't fix it. No one stopped it. It couldn't, it didn't stop. And so I think that's part of it too, is that there is this kind of promise in the air that everything's going to be okay, and everything wasn't okay.
It feels a little bit actually like, the post World War I disillusionment with the Victorian techno-optimism.
Mm. Yeah.
There's for example, there's definitely a snapshot of the deep primateness that is always there, and is more powerful than and suffuses the technological layer. The degree to which everything is being driven by shallowness or selfishness or meanness or groupthink or righteousness, like all those kinds of characteristics, and saying, oh, that's actually the much bigger phenomenon. And to the degree to which there are, well, to be frank, solutions at all,
Yeah.
those solutions rarely tend to be targeted technical. And then you get the thing. So frankly, to my dismay, I learned that my 16-year-old signed up to be in the clinical trials for the mRNA Moderna vaccine for adolescents. I was like, oh my gosh, that's seems like a really bad choice. But the gap closing on that of a techno-optimistic, on the one hand, it is really interesting at a technical level. Like if you're looking at it from the point of view of just being a scientist, this is a totally new thing. It's really amazing. We're actually endeavoring to, for the very first time, intentionally and deliberately inject something that modifies the genetic coding of human cells to produce a predictable result. That's really neat. On the other hand,
first.
on the other hand, we have no idea what that means. Like none. Like it's important. Like from a scientific perspective, it's important to like be able to have the epistemological honesty of no idea. We actually have no idea. And by the way, the methodologies that we think that we use to be able to evaluate the consequences of things are probably not even close to being appropriate. We're going to put it through a clinical trial, which is appropriate for, we've learned over time that certain kinds of trials with certain numbers of people with certain kinds of contexts over certain durations reveal certain kinds of things.
Right.
Yeah. What if this has epigenetic downstream consequences for fourth generation children? We don't know.
I mean, what if? I mean, at some level, it will. We just don't know what.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
there you go.
yeah.
And that's sort of like the banner carrier for the magic bullet. Like, oh, we're all just gonna wait, hunker down until a small cadre of scientists will produce this magical technical solution that will solve the problem. Which, by the way, just kind of link it back. Yeah, it's interesting. So the other snapshot that I've really seen, and again, it's this kind of like greasy lens. So people are seeing things, but they're not seeing it clearly. Is both the architecture, the methodology of the thing that I was calling the Blue Church,
Yeah.
and its senescence. So the Blue Church, its heyday was things like moonshots. Like it is that kind of a thing. And so naturally, when it reaches into its bag of tricks, it's not going to look at things like, how do you make 10,000 micro shifts in behavior that are together are a complex response to a complex problem. It's going to look for one super hard, Apollo rocket kind of magic bullet that disrupts the controls the event, doesn't disrupt it, controls the event. And in the meantime, we're going to see it actually lurch about and about face and tell things that aren't true and take things that are true and make them lies in order to just kind of try to manage the situation. and you get a good sense of what it is. But unfortunately, as people pop and get a sense of it, then their own interior models, like they're disconnected from a control structure, but they aren't attached to anything that gives them a capacity to really respond to what's going on. So then we're seeing this proliferation of, you know, what was it? The thing that Peter Lindbergh points to in the culture war is a proliferation of people grouping together with endeavoring to find some new way of collectively, a new paradigm for collectively grasping and hammering sense into reality.
And they don't have anything in their in their pre-bundled language, imagination, vision box that isn't going to just perpetuate what's actually already happening.
That is such a important thing. Yeah, the recognition that if you have a million weird in these sort of particular kinds of people, people running Western code, and you deleted the entire socio-technical infrastructure that we live in and said, okay, build something new, they would rebuild it because they're, the interior is a mirror of the exterior, and not just a mirror, but it produces the exterior while the exterior produces the interior. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is something that is driving me actually kind of crazy right now, is that I'm seeing that it's become very popular to talk about, systems and complexity. But the way in which it's described, expressed, and taught and utilized is like engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And, engineering's fine for engineering, but don't be thinking that you're doing ecological thinking when you're doing that. And so this question of like, how do you engineer a way to not engineer?
Yeah, that's
right?
it.
And it's a tricky one.
It's a very tricky one because that step, that second step where you have to actually decouple what's called engineering mind, engineering habits, dispositions, even like distinctions. As you develop cognitively, many of the distinctions that you learn actually get pretty hardwired, and you actually start seeing the world through very specific distinctions. Like, it's a phenomenologically deep thing, and to remove that, to consciously choose to remove that, it puts you in that classic sort of liminal space. Like, whoa, oh man, I don't have any idea how to do anything.
Particularly if there is a motivation to do that is seeking a way to manipulate not doing it. You get into a terrible paradox.
Oh, I apologize.
Munchkins?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I'm sorry, what were you just saying? Something about?
I was just saying yeah. Well, it's the motivation to manipulate. How many people are trying to manage?
I like the word manage because it carries an ambiguous connotation.
Yeah.
There's a positive. We've got to manage the problem, people. And there's a positive sense, and then, but within it is very specifically, it's control. Right? It's somebody actually I met entirely virtually in the sort of springtime, shared with me a framework, like a very broad scale framework, some of which still I scratch my head at, but there's some insights there that I metabolized pretty quickly, which was that a large part of the mess that we're seeing and by the way, not just the mess in the context of COVID, but more broadly,
Yeah.
has to do with the near ubiquitous position of the managerial mindset in positions of leadership and authority.
I have no doubt that that's true. And incidentally, they don't have any choice.
They've been given leadership and authority, and they've got a managerial mindset. What are you going to do?
Yeah. And they don't have in that position, you're not allowed to say, let's just see what happens here. I've had a really interesting year, because this year I kept thinking, oh, it's a pandemic, I'm going to get my book written, and I didn't do it. I'm so glad I didn't do it, because what has happened is I have learned, I just can't even tell you, Jordan, what I have learned. And because, I bet we've done maybe 14,000 warm data labs or something this year around they're just
Wow.
like, it's everywhere now.
Wow.
It's 40 different countries. It's like they're all over the place. And I just didn't have any idea. I knew that something was happening, but I didn't really know what. And I didn't really know what because I didn't, it's like being in another culture or something. I just didn't have the familiarity with even enough of the nuances that I could find to even sort what was between the nuances. I had no idea. I just knew something was happening. But what I'm starting to really see now is how subtle it is, but how profound. And that when people are doing these processes, they have no idea. I have no idea. But the people who they are in rooms with when they're doing it online, they don't know who they're going to get. They don't know what they're going to say. They don't know. Like, it's wild. There's nothing domesticated about the process.
Mm-hmm.
So we have no idea what impressions will be lit, what memories will be rekindled, what gestures will be activated. We have no idea. And then in turn, what comes out of that, right? So it's very much it's very untamed, and but it's very subtle, and it's not untamed in the sense of it being terrifying. It's just that the wilderness is kind of below the surface of what's happening. And so if you looked at the transcript of your warm data session, you'd be like, yeah, okay, so whatever. But it's not, oh, so whatever. Because somehow really deep things, when you start to see something, a family interaction, a single family interaction from your childhood, and you see it through a couple of different contextual frameworks within the course of an hour, it starts to actually rewrite the history of your life. And that's very significant. So, and then we started doing them with intergenerational groups, and just sort of, because I trained all these hosts, I didn't know what to do with them. I was like, okay, we got to build community. You guys need practice. Well, whatever. Let's just like have some warm data sessions and invite people, invite your family. And as practice. And of course, what you and I know is that wasn't just willy-nilly. That in fact, in the intergenerational habituated language, habituated processes, where do we learn to be in relationship with ourselves and with the world? In the intergenerational space. So, there's this illusion that you can change the self to change that relationship. But what I've seen so profoundly is that shift actually happens in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen in me or in my mother or in my daughter. It happens somewhere in the relational process that you can't put your finger on, and you can't psychobabble your way through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no direct corrective. Nobody is talking about their problems that they need to sort. They're talking about a vacation or a trip to this or reflection on that. But suddenly those things reframe everything. And so it's also been a really interesting
Hmm.
space in that there has been, um, this is going to be amazing to you, but there has been zero conflict around gender, race, politics. Zero. Not because people aren't, dealing with that, but because in order to engage in those scripts, and they are scripts,
Mm-hmm.
you have to decontextualize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And so because people are working in the online warm data space, there's 3 contexts at a time. So you have a question, what's being revealed or something, and you're in a breakout room with 4 people, and you're working through 3 contexts. So you might have history, culture, technology, I don't know, something like that. And what's being revealed, and people start talking. And so what's under all of those things that produce all these weird gender relationships kind of surfaces, but it never surfaces directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Wow.
so it's wow, because that in my experience right now in other spaces, those subjects come up, and you're just fuck it. You're just down the double bind round. At that point, the conversation's basically over. And you can't unstick it, because anything you say is the wrong thing. Anything anybody else says is the wrong thing. If they speak, they did it wrong. If they don't speak, they did it wrong. There's nothing you can actually do,
Right.
except you're just double binded completely. So, but bringing in a lot more context undoes those double binds and makes it impossible. So that's been fascinating. Anyway, it's been interesting. I've learned a lot this
Yeah.
year.
So the image that came up, actually, a bunch of images were coming up for me just then. One was hard to explain. I can't really articulate the image in words, but the sense of it has to do with the notion that the complexity. I'm seeing like a very large mesh of let's make it like it's like a spider's web. So I've got a spider's web that has a very large mesh of threads and nodes. And then if I turn it sideways and I
Mm,
imagine it as being a cylinder, right? So
yeah.
I've got a spider's web, I've got a cylinder made out of it, and I look at a single thread running through the center of it. Some of these simpler reductio, it's actually the modality of reductio from the complex to the complicated. What it does
Yeah.
is it truncates the channels through which I'm going to call it the energy can
Mm-hmm.
flow, so that instead of having the complexity holding the whole of the energy, and therefore the energy actually being able to be held, the complicated structure, which in this case call it gender, is trying to hold the whole of the energy, but it could never do that. And it's not the kind, it has no capacity to hold that much volume of nuance and subtlety and detail and precision, and also just straight up intensity. And so
Right.
that's how you get the double bind. And the way that you unstick it is you say, by allowing the energy to actually land in this highly distributed, diverse, and bespoke, like each different piece. Because of course, every event is an enormously complex event. And if you try to take the enormous complexity out of the event and project it into a simple projection that captures a bunch of events, you're going to get, superheated over on this side.
Right.
Yeah, I think, and that's so if you think about that and you just think about that conceptually and project that back to what we were talking about in terms of the response to COVID,
Yeah.
again, the proper response has always been and will always be this enormously complex and subtle, multifaceted, bespoke, local, fluid, shifting, changing, like, like a big,
Yeah.
infinitely fingered hug that actually
Yeah.
is able to sort of play the instrument of reality well, as opposed to, a single wire
Totally.
trying to hold the whole thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then you said, Yeah, the notion of unstuck, and I had an image of like guitar strings, but somehow there was like a waxy material that was actually holding them all together. So you tried to play it, it was just like plunk. But then there was enough temperature, the wax began to melt away, and they thunk, came back out into being separate strings, and the tonality could happen. And then wildness, the wildness is just beneath the surface. Yeah. Yeah, Vanessa and I have been talking a lot about that. She's been reading the galley copy of Jamie Wheel's new book. Like she's actually, I think she's through it 1.5 times now, and trying to tease apart, frankly, what it is what he's actually trying to say. And hold on, what the heck was it? Shoot. Oh, wildness beneath the surface. Right. Yeah, we were talking, and she said, well, don't you keep saying things like, the global financial and political system is poised for imminent collapse? Like, yeah, I am. I'm not saying it eschatologically. I'm not saying that it was preordained that it would end up that way. But I'm saying something like, if you drop a ball, it falls. It's more of there are characteristics of this kind of thing that it tends to do that. And if you take a look at where it is, it's at the point where collapse is where it's going to happen. And then what she said was something like, I associate collapse with chaos. And that's where it got interesting. And I said, oh, well, yes, sometimes. It depends. The longer the control system, back to our managers, and they have no choice, the longer the control system inhibits the emergence of some capacity to support the complexity of what's really happening. When the complicated system breaks, that stuff blows past whatever sort of complex system you've got, and you end up in chaos. But if the complex system has actually got enough robustness beneath it, the wildness is just below the surface, then when the complicated system goes away, the energy comes back out, it frees up, and it doesn't blow up. It actually kind of gets held, and then it becomes anti-fragile. It grows the system into its environment, like rootstock suddenly getting a burst of water and light, growing rapidly to fill that environment. So that's, for me, it's more of a pragmatic question of where actually are we. Unfortunately, my assessment is that the control structure has proven to be quite effective at control, and has been quite effective at inhibiting any alternatives or any fungal growth in the local ecosystem. So we may, in fact, be headed towards a collapse that is equal to chaos. But the notion that the wildness is just beneath the surface, and the notion that there are ways to... Hi, sweet girl. That's a very, very nice outfit. She's got a pink, sparkly, almost like Turkish skirt, no shirt, and then like a white and gold vest with no sleeves, and then pigtails.
Excellent.
Yeah.
She's ready for anything.
She can go anywhere right now, particularly in San Diego. In Sweden, she might be a bit cold, but
yeah, it's a little cold here.
It's actually only been like in the last week that she's actually ever uttered the phrase, "I feel a little cold," and she's naked most of the time.
I was that kid. I mean, the thing is, Jordan, is like, there's very uneven capacities of perception. So, when you hear a piece of music for the first time, you only hear some of it that is, for some reason, hearable to you because maybe it's familiar. It might be like something else. And so you have like tentacles that can kind of find that.
Yeah.
Right? But most of the stuff that's connecting the other notes and the rhythms, and certainly the connotations that lead to other cultures, prior history, and ceremony and belief systems, and all that stuff, it's not there for you. It's just not there. And So what, but then you listen to it 17 more times. And then you listen to some other music that is from the same maybe land or the same musicians, and you start to find your way in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you're still not going to be writing that music.
Hmm.
It's still
And
not
by the
your
way,
brain. Yeah.
don't.
And by the way, don't. Right.
Yeah.
Um, but and by the way, don't. Okay. And then just think, for me, that's sort of how I am looking at people's understanding of ecology. Okay, so we've got some things that we are a little bit familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, biology has given us some things that we can see, and we're able to see those things through biology because of other stuff that has informed the academy and the process of that type of learning and identifying and naming and measuring and, you know, all of that stuff. There's beauty in that. But let's face it, a tree does not call itself a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's another thing happening in the ecology itself. And so I think one of the reasons we're caught in this managerial trap is because the perception of ecology is frankly so inadequate. It's just plain inadequate. So that's, I think, another way of saying one of the things I'm learning through this warm data process is I'm learning to actually perceive ecology in another way.
Mm-hmm. In the natural
Because
language of ecology.
it's, yeah, because the way I'm seeing people begin to see connections, and more than them seeing connections, they're seeing that they didn't see connections. And that's actually more important
Mm-hmm.
than that they're seeing connections. They're perceiving the edges of their frames. They're starting to perceive that what they were perceiving was only a perception.
Mm. And feeling comfortable with the fact that those frames are not the only way to be engaged in the thing called perception.
Right. So the warmth, because there's definitely a sense of warmth, the warmth kind of comes from the freedom of that, of suddenly feeling, oh, there's like right under the surface, there's all this possibility. There's so much here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't
Which,
know
as you
what it
say,
is, and I don't know how to talk about it, but it's here.
is a practice. Like
Yeah.
if I were to sit people down in a classroom and articulate my personal experience of going through something like this, it may convince them to be willing to begin the practice, but will not convey really much of an iota of the practice. And there's a comfort. What's the right term? Even a strength is a better term. As you practice more. So this going back to your metaphor of the music. As you listen more, you can be invited to begin the process of playing a little bit, like play a single string and feel the way the string resonates with the aspect in you that is activated when you listen to this Miss Milieu, this oeuvre of music. And then as you begin to play it, there's a really interesting, and this is in fact ecological per se. You for sure are not reproducing that lineage, but some part of you is weaving some part of that into something that is in fact new, but contains elements of both, as I'm seeing like a double strand of DNA kind of weaving together.
Exactly.
If you're going slow, right? Of course, there's the problem. This is when I say and don't. When I say and don't, what I mean is don't try to simulate this thing over here that is not, fundamentally it's not yours. Like start from what is yours and take that part of this that is in fact has been metabolized into you that you truly can feel with honor, with sort of integrity and quality, and then begin to weave that back up. And it may be very small, but that's okay.
It's fine. Just, I mean, but the don't is very serious.
It's very serious. Yeah.
It's very serious. And it's something that, yeah.
No, actually, yeah, you're right. When the don't is, hold on, it's like biblical serious.
Yeah, it's very serious. Don't. Just don't do that. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been just fascinated to see this. And I also just recognizing that no matter, what it is that has to happen at this point, it is not going to be possible unless there is a perception shift. There's the idea of creating models of projects and implementing them without perception shift. I
That's
mean,
how I got here.
forget it.
Yeah, this was
But yeah.
I agree. The thing that just popped into my mind, and it's interesting to sort of, so what would I say? So perception, and then something maybe like, almost like disposition, or an
It is
intuitive sense.
aesthetic. There is an aesthetic
Yeah, an
shift.
aesthetic.
Yeah.
I was reminded of how regenerative agriculture works.
Mm.
And in some sense, that's what we're about. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good, almost maybe even a mapping. Agriculture is one of the earliest instantiations of the managerial mindset, and large chunks of civilization are adjunct to agriculture. And they're just glued on as a necessity, and glued on as a necessity, and glued on as a necessity, or unlocked as a new, adjacent possible in managerial space. But if I'm taking agriculture, I'm doing regeneration. What I notice is, first of all, it takes time.
Yeah.
It's gonna go down before it goes up. And in the down stage, in the beginning, it's weeds.
Right.
I don't have fruit anymore in my 10,000 acre monoculture orange grove that all the soil has been depleted. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
I'm going to get weeds. If I get anything at all, I'm going to get weeds, and then I'm going to get pests. And so it's actually, it may look like a deeply downward trajectory. But again, actually biblical in nature.
Yeah.
7 years of pestilence, and each year I see a little tiny glimmer of an emergence of the actual healthy ecosystem. But even more so, I still have another downward wave of some new piece that's coming in. And if I can understand that the new piece that's coming in is an intrinsic piece of the ecosystem regenerating, coming back into its selfness and building all the loamy, complex infrastructure that it needs to be to simply be an ecosystem, then I can sort of nod to it and say, and yes, we're moving forward. This is John Vervaeke and I had a conversation about grief, and I think these are very closely related. Grief is the underground work that's being done to actually heal something. It's the stitching back together again, and it's the energy that's stitching back together again underneath in the dark that has to happen.
And it is in the underground. Like this, we are talking about the underground.
Yeah.
In every sense of the word, in the sense of the soil, we're talking about it in the sense of the stuff that's dark that you can't see. We're talking about it in the sense of the kind of, like the Underground Railroad, the kind of, the whole rebellion of this is actually totally underground. And it isn't a rollout. It isn't a fanfare. It isn't a, this is like any orientation toward existing glim glam is a mistake.
That's right. Yeah. That's actually nice. It's even just heuristic. If you notice existing glim glam is pointed in your direction, something's going awry.
Yeah. Head for the shadows.
Yeah. Head for the shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's hard to do because you try to get funding and you try to get support and you try to get, enough like people interested. And in order to get them interested, you have to have some bandwidth. And then, there's like all this crap that you get involved in that is so utterly crappy. And if it becomes a meme, it's gone. There's nothing. It's gone. Start over.
It's gone. Yeah, start over.
Yeah.
That is my relationship with the thing formerly known as Game B.
Yeah, that thing.
I tried to give it a name. I tried to give it a name from this esoteric tradition that was difficult to meme, but the power of memeing is strong.
Well, and there were a lot of people attracted to that space who were attracted to memeing. So it wasn't the game B, it was I think it was it's what was already in the soil there.
Yeah.
That's what was gonna grow. If that's what is in the soil, that's what will grow no matter what seed you plant.
Yeah. And again, if I can look at it and say, hey, there was a weed, we went just, maybe you're going through the weed phase. No, actually, I think we're probably going through the rat phase right now, or the pest phase. That's good news. That means that the loam is beginning to build, and everybody who continues to grow in the context of their actual, that practice, the practice of listening to the music and beginning to become more and more sensitive and, oh, okay, and confident, comfortable with, oh, I can begin to play music that has something more than nothing in it. And that's how it happens. Yeah. I noticed that I'm a little bit, there's a fear. I have a fear of, and it's very related to that notion of collapse equals chaos.
Mm.
That people, and pretty much everybody outside of small areas of what used to be called the third world, are profoundly uncomfortable with lack of luxury. Let's put it that way. Like we've unfortunately gone to the other side of that. We went through a place where the presence of luxury was a wonderful thing, to the absence of luxury is a horrible thing. And the unwillingness to be able to step away from the presence of luxury, or more importantly, the unwillingness to step into the absence of luxury. And I don't mean even if you choose to do so, even if you consciously say that's virtuous and choose to do so, the deep embodied hesitancy and the inability to actually go there as we go into a global weed phase. I guess that's just what it's going to be.
Well, and for me, that's why the perception shift is so needed. So, what most, yeah, without the perception shift, that perception shift is a sort of inoculation against that type of violent chaos where we're against each other.
Yeah,
Right.
the thing that just came in when you said that, and I was like, it's funny, you said perception shift, and I found myself searching for, okay, how does that land in me? Was almost like a trade.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, well, I'll make you a trade. I will take materialist excess and superfluous luxury, and I will give you meaning. I will give you love. I'll give you beauty, and I'll give you the sacred. Is that
Mm-hmm.
a good trade? And there's almost like a small, like you can imagine, like a little barter at the edges, like a little bit. And I don't mean by the way that there's an expectation that one must live a mendicant monk lifestyle, but there's a big gap between enough and now 4 or 5 generations of run amok conspicuous consumption, for example.
Yeah.
And that's a perception shift that if you feel it, feels very wholesome. And then it's okay.
What I'm seeing is very, very similar to that. And I would describe it just a little bit differently, but it's the same thing. It's the perception that uh, that that all of these contexts, that all of these institutions, that you can't find the beginning and the end of these problems.
Hmm.
Okay, so the first things that happen with people in this warm data space is they become hopeless
Hmm.
because they look at it and they go, "Oh my God, how the hell are we supposed to solve these problems?" And at first, I was really worried about that because I thought, well, you can't go around breeding hopelessness. And then I was like, well, actually, what the fuck? I've been waiting for this my whole life. Finally, these people are starting to get the enormity of what it is to actually talk about systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about it like you could, just do a couple things and then you'd have systems change. And that's ridiculous. And so finally people were getting how serious this thing actually is, and they were like, "Oh no," you know. And but then the next thing was that they started to perceive a kind of, well, the project is called People Need People. They're starting to perceive that there isn't actually anything there, and that in order to do what they need to do, they have to build relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And in that relationship, here's the interesting thing: they have no idea who they are. No idea. So what starts to happen is there's this thing, this kind of, I call it finding a way, but there's this thing of, well, let's just figure this out. But if you just go to the let's just figure this out from a mechanistic engineering mindset, you just figure it out with a bunch of engineering solutions, right? But if there's that perception shift first, then the let's just figure it out becomes a really interesting exploration of who is Jordan in relationship to Nora.
Mm-hmm.
What thoughts do you think when you're in conversation with me? Who am I when I'm with you? Because it's not just who am I or what I'm capable of, right? This
Yep.
idea of collaboration is not an engineering question. It's not an engineering question. If it were an engineering question, we would ask, what's Jordan good at? What's Nora good at? What's Daniel good at? What's Phoebe good at? And we'd say, okay, together we can form this machine. But the thing is, we actually don't know what we're good at when we're together. We don't know. So that means that you're going to be thinking things you never thought before and being able to become in ways that you never could become before, because I am becoming with you in new ways. It's not it's an ecology. It's not actually a machine.
Well, here's where things I think get pretty potent, because you've referenced the discovery of the presence of the relationship as real and maybe even in some sense more fundamental. And then there's the experience of there's an experience for me, an experience of an orientation towards like a form of a pivot. Just say, oh,
Mm,
what happens if I perceive what's happening as this one is acting as a particular vessel or vehicle for the expression of the relationship into the shared space.
yeah,
So it's no longer Jordan is talking with Nora, but rather there's a relationship that takes time to emerge. There's always a dance in the beginning as we begin to discover and feel into the nature of what it is. But then there's a point where you can kind of relax into it and discover, oh, here's the aspect of this relationship that speaks most, speaks through this vehicle well, or speaks through this vehicle in a particular way. And it's funny, the phrase that popped into my head was the law of the included middle.
mm-hmm.
The image of the machine is fundamentally, I would say, the image of logic, which is the image of the law of the excluded middle. That's specifically taking the space between us and deleting it, and having an architecture that can try to operate with just these without the middle. When you include the middle back in, you're doing something quite different. And what you
Right.
discover is that the middle is gigantic.
Yeah, it's gigantic. It's absolutely filled with possibility. And there, all that hopelessness is replaced. The hopelessness is there. You should be hopeless. If you're going to try to solve this issue piecemeal, forget it.
You're
That
trying to
is a
solve it analytically. I've actually calculated it out. The probability is 0. So
zero.
hopelessness is an appropriate response.
Yeah, right?
But there's
So
good
don't,
news. You don't have to
yeah,
do it that way. There's another way to do it.
yeah.
Probability, by the way,
Exactly.
epsilon 0, but not 0.
Probability is in a parallel zone at that point.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
different kind of thing. A totally different. It's the experience of going through the looking glass. I've said like the feeling I have when you go through that looking glass, it's like being a Klein bottle. It's not
Yeah.
an inverse or a converse. It's an involution. It's very difficult you cannot think about it. You cannot perceive it from here. You can only go through the looking glass, and then, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. It's this strange, I mean, of course, it's always good to remember, the old school stuff. There's so much in the old school teachers, just the way they were talking about digital and analog.
Mm.
And, language is digital. The warm data is in the analog.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness we can't describe it. And if we could, we would put it into these, it's map and territory. We would screw it up again.
Right. We can do the inverse. We
Yeah.
can allow the aesthetic, we can allow the vibe of the thing that is emerging to gently arrange our words in a particular fashion so that
That's
the
it.
feeling is showing up in the coherence that is producing it, but the words are not the thing.
The words are not the thing. The vibe is the logic into which those words fill.
Yeah.
Right. And people, I wish the court system understood that. But it's fascinating. Anyway, it's been a great learning and unprecedented. I feel like I'm sitting on this body of stuff that I really need to now nest into something.
Now the book's coming out.
Now we're working on it. But I had to kind of recognize that I couldn't just write this out like I would write anything else out.
Mm-hmm.
That it's actually going to require another kind of language and structure.
Yeah.
To deal with it. And that's really important, Jordan. That's really important. That's like, what we're actually needing right now is new genres of art, entirely new genres of art that can say something and express something and find something that is unfindable otherwise. Like hip hop did that. It was impossible to describe the experience of inner city Black life and the projects with white English.
Yeah.
It was impossible. And hip hop became an expression of that experience that could not have happened without that art form. Well, there's no way. I mean, not that you and I will ever understand the experience of living in the inner city projects of Black America, but we might feel the vibe of it through the music in a little way.
In some sense, we might even say empirically it must have happened because something happened, like a bomb went off in culture.
Right. And
something
it
happened.
was actually, it kind of bugs me when I hear the Swedish hip hop because I feel like posers. But actually, it's kind of cool too, because it says whatever this thing is that they started expressing, these people feel it too.
Right. Yeah, that's the key.
Right.
It may just be a little bit or a different flavor, but there's a vibing with the vibe.
And rock and roll did that. You see those images of the Rolling Stones going to Japan. And they didn't understand a word of the but they felt it. And that feeling was like, So
I want to share something with you.
Yeah.
In this context, and I don't really know, but I notice that the part of me that in the past has found itself paying attention to things that later have turned out to be worth paying attention to is kind of pointing in at this thing. And I learned it from my daughter, which also has a richness to it. So I don't know if you're familiar with there's 2 or 3 media. Yeah. So you've got this thing called live streaming. You're familiar with that, I imagine.
Yeah.
And in particular, there's a thing that's associated with live streaming of playing a game, like on your computer. Let's go with Minecraft because it's the one that I happen to be familiar with in this context.
Okay.
And it's funny because another aspect of this is that feeling of like being the 50s parent who tells the boomer kid to turn the rock and roll down. That's just noise.
Yeah.
I'm watching somebody live stream Minecraft, and from my point of view, what they're doing is distinctly not attractive, right? So there's a screen, and you're watching somebody play Minecraft. Like, why would that be alluring? And they're chattering in some way. Like there's some
non-stop vomit.
Yeah, non-stop chattering and playing Minecraft, and oftentimes not obviously connected. Like they're talking, and one that I saw that was like, oh, that's interesting. This guy was like doing a whole like riff on some really interesting topic over here while playing Minecraft there. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting juxtaposition, but I'm not sure that's the deep point. But then if you look at Minecraft as an instrument, right? So I'm using the hip hop metaphor.
Yeah.
You got instruments. Every medium is an instrument that has a potential for expression of something. Some of the characteristics of Minecraft are a huge population of kids played Minecraft in the time frame where you learn instruments well. Right? In the ages between like 6, 7, 8, many hundreds of millions of kids played Minecraft a lot. Right? So they learned how to play this instrument at the level of like pre-egoic self. Whatever, pre-adolescent self.
Yeah.
And oftentimes played it through that period. The game is a sandbox game, right? So it's ultimately has no particular driver. Like games that aren't sandbox games, because of the driver of the game controls intent and motivation, it's very limited in its expressive capacity. But Minecraft is intrinsically a sandbox game. Here's something, it's like Legos. You can do something cool with it. But it's also almost always become a collaborative game, because the kids that grew up in the Minecraft era also grew up in the internet era. The ability to play with other people is possible and a lot more fun. And so collaboration with other people is part of the instrumentality, right? So it's no longer the lone guitarist sitting on stage expressing their interior subjective through musicality. It's actually a group of people collaboratively discovering how this shared instrumentality can create a collaborative expression that feels to them. There's a shared feeling. Now, so I've got people who are playing Minecraft. I've got live streaming. And recently, like literally in the context of COVID, like in the spring of last year, a new thing emerged that began the process of I have a Minecraft world, which by the way has its own language. I think it's called a server. And I've got some number of people who are in that particular world. And many of them are live streamers. So now what happens is I actually have multiple different perspectives. I could watch person 1 or person 2 or person 3, or I could watch both simultaneously, who are kind of looking at a particular slice of the world, whichever their particular, literally their camera angle happens to be. And if 2 characters are talking with each other, in principle, I could actually have both views of the same conversation. And then the notion of putting a story, creating an epic story emerges. And so they begin the process of rolling out and creating an epic story. It has arcs, and it has conflict, and it has struggles over geopolitics, and it has betrayal, and it has adventure, and it has subplots that you can choose to, like some subplots are like super esoteric, like somebody just spending literally months building a building. People are like, wow, that's cool. Let's see how he does that. What's that all? Architecture. And then it spills out. So you've got people who are watching it on the live streams, and of course chatting with each other on Discord channels, right? So think about the nature of this medium. It's got all these different technical architectures to it. It's including Minecraft, it's including Discord, it's including Twitch, it's including YouTube channels, like you can record a particular live stream and millions of people can watch it. And by the way, millions of people are watching it.
Yeah, I know. Amazing, isn't it?
Then you've got people who are taking the raw content and they're creating animatics of it. So they'll actually draw an animation that is sort of using the voices that are part of the live streams, but cutting them together into something which is a linear piece of content, basically an animated movie, but imbuing their own aesthetics on top of it. This is what I feel like the characters look like. It doesn't look like, they're not trying to simulate the sort of the lo-fi Minecraft aesthetic. They're actually doing some other kind of aesthetic, and it could be anything. So this is an emergent thing. And as far as I can tell, it may actually be as big as hip hop in terms of the implications. Like there's an expression, an entire generation, which is global in nature, right? There's nothing about it that's even the least bit national, although the dominant language tends to be English, but it's global in nature. It's highly multimedia. It's highly collaborative and interactive. And it has something to do with this, with shared weaving together, shared building, place.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing. I think it's really important. And it might be that you and I are on the outside.
It's all good, man.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. Guess what? I just got a ping saying I'm supposed to show up in some Zoom room right now to give a talk, and I don't have it anywhere on my calendar, and I'm kind of freaking out, but
We get
yes,
to
I'll say
practice your virtuosity.
Jordan, I love when we get to hang out. I love it. I just always want to do more. And we should do some more just like impromptu, just get together and talk in public spaces.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, let's do that. I think
just
there's a good vibe.
it's such a good vibe. It's such a good vibe. And it's I like it because I really appreciate your rigor, and I know that you're not gonna, start shoving any stupid theory or mindfulness down my throat. And I'm
Mm.
about done with all that stuff. I'm like, my patience level on that front is like a little dangerously low right now.
I think that's a good sign. I get the feeling that you're maybe you're representing something there.
Yeah, it's
All
time.
right. Well, nice to see you.
But
Talk to you
it's
soon.
so good to see you. Give my love to Vanessa, and just love to your family. And I really, really just appreciate spending time with you. It's the best. So
Will do.
I'm gonna make a date with you to do this again super soon.
Great. Do it. I'll
And
say
I
yes.
want to do stuff. Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jordan. Thank you.